Afternoon, everyone. BCG Center for Climate and Energy Transition in Africa. First of all, I would like to thank our guest coming in person today. We have leaders from government. We have leaders from some of the top companies in South Africa. You can see the logos of the companies represented today. We'd like to also thank the people watching us online. We are live streaming on YouTube as well. A quick introduction about myself. My name is Lucas Chaumontet. I'm Managing Director and Partner at BCG in South Africa, and I lead our work on climate and just transition across the continent. Before introducing our center, I would like to share a bit about the role that BCG plays on climate globally, starting with our own commitment. We committed to net zero by 2030 and also to reduce our emissions, our own emissions by 50% by 2025. We have also established a fund of $400 million to invest in high-impact climate projects together with our clients. A lot of that money is going into Africa, and a good example of that is the study that we've been doing with NBI over the last 2 years, which has been funded by this fund for half of the cost of the study. We're also part of major climate initiatives globally. We're part of CEO coalitions with the World Economic Forum, with the United Nations. Also at regional level, we're supporting UN Global Compact in setting up the Africa Business Leader Coalition, as well at national level, like for example, the NBI coalition with 30 CEOs here in South Africa. We're also contributing at sector level. We are supporting the Oil and Gas Climate Initiative. We're also supporting the Aviation Climate Task Force, to just name a couple. We are also investing in climate technology and climate innovation in different ways, but the most notable one is our contribution to Breakthrough Energy Catalyst as a founding member together with Bill Gates and others. We are also supporting the improvement of the measurement and disclosure of emissions with a partnership with CDP, the Carbon Disclosure Project. And we are also partnering with SAP in finding technological solutions to better capture emissions in the core systems of the companies, including Scope 3, which is the most challenging. And we are partnering with governments around the world to establish net zero strategies for countries and roadmaps to achieve those in many different countries. So now, moving into the climate center that we are launching today, we'd like to start with the purpose. Our purpose is to unlock the full potential of Africa to advance climate action and a just transition. So really stressing the catalyst role that we want to play in this with 3 key priorities. The first priority is to co-create aligned fact basis at national level, which is a very important foundation to drive alignment, to drive optimal decision-making, and to drive cooperation. And a good example of that is the work that we've been doing with NBI and 30 CEOs in this country. The second key priority is to build and scale green businesses and green industries more broadly, which is absolutely critical, particularly in African countries, to make sure that we create jobs and ultimately that we achieve a just transition. A good example of that is the work that we do on green hydrogen in South Africa with many stakeholders across the country, and we will have a panel on this in a few minutes to go deeper on this topic. The third critical priority is the development of critical capabilities within private and public sector, which is also absolutely key to ensure there is ownership, leadership within the African countries in this journey. Also consistently with the purpose to unlock the potential of Africa. And some examples of this is the work that we do with a few companies here in South Africa in building their teams to drive new green businesses. Having a BOT type of model, build, operate, transfer, meaning that we play an important role in the beginning, but with the intention to fully transfer that to the local companies. Now moving into content, our objective is to establish a center of excellence, a platform of expertise and knowledge, aiming to provide a holistic toolbox for corporates and governments to address the climate challenges in Africa. And we do that by leveraging thousands of projects around the world, including in Africa, across the various topics: mitigation, adaptation and resilience, socioeconomic modeling, digital enablers, integrated policies, incubation of new green businesses, to name a few. Now, moving to our team, we are launching the center today, but we have already 50 members. And you can see here the leadership team. It is a team that covers geographically the African continent quite well. We also cover all the key topics and key industries. This team is 100% based in Africa, and the vast majority are Africans, also consistently with our purpose to unlock the potential of Africa. And this is the BCG team, but beside this BCG team, we are also working with several partners, including from civil society and academia. And now I would like to give you a bit of more flavors of the work that we do across the continent, hearing from our colleagues, and we'll play a short video before we move to the panel on green hydrogen.
Of all the continents, Africa has contributed the least to climate change, accounting for less than 3% of cumulative global CO2 emissions. Nevertheless, Africa is likely to be disproportionately impacted by the effects of climate change, and must build resilience for its economies and societies. That is why BCG has launched its Center for Climate and Just Transition in Africa, to unlock the full potential of Africa to advance climate action and a just transition. Let's hear more from our offices across the continent about some of the work we are already doing to make this purpose a reality.
In South Africa, BCG has partnered with the National Business Initiative and BUSA, Business Unity South Africa, to try and understand what it will take for the country to transition to net zero. What BCG did was to drive multi-stakeholder discussions on the critical fact base around what this is actually going to mean for the country. We've had over 120 hours of workshops with over 100 different experts in industry and academia to try and really validate some of the critical assumptions going into the work. And the work's also been backed by 30 of South Africa's top CEOs to really drive one voice of industry behind the work as well.
We have launched Green Ventures Africa, which is a new model for BCG in the region to build and scale climate-smart solutions at various stages of maturity across the continent. Most recently, we've been working with a few companies. One is a sustainable aquaculture company that is really addressing the nutrition gap. Another is an electric mobility company that's providing financing that allows electric vehicles to be more affordable than their petrol equivalents.
With 40% of the global population living in coastal areas, it is imperative that we better understand the impacts of sea level rise and storm surge in these areas. That is why the Moroccan BCG Gamma team has developed a powerful analytical tool to map out the impacts of sea level rise and storm surge in coastal areas. It allows any user anywhere in the world to model and see the impacts of sea level rise, compare it to other regions of the world, and analyze the associated socioeconomic impacts.
Lagos is a coastal megacity and has peculiar climate change risks. To address these risks, Lagos is developing a clear adaptation and resilience plan ahead of COP27, and BCG is supporting for this work. We are leveraging advanced analytics, data from various sources, and a deep understanding of the local context in Lagos as people who live in Lagos ourselves.
Achieving a climate-resilient, socially just, decarbonized future for African countries is critical. Not just for Africa, but for the good of the world. Through our Center for Climate and Just Transition in Africa, BCG are committed to help making this a reality.
Okay, I hope everybody enjoyed the video. My name is Kesh Madali. I'm a principal here in BCG's Johannesburg office. And I, together with Luca, co-lead our Center for Climate and Just Transition in Africa. So it's a pleasure to have everybody here today and also online. Today I have the pleasure of also hosting a panel on green hydrogen and the opportunity that creates in Africa. With that, I have an esteemed panel that I would like to invite to come up on stage right now, and then I'll formally introduce them once they're seated. Yeah? Can come up. Yeah, just in order. Okay, so firstly, I would like to thank and say it's an honor and a privilege to be seated with such an esteemed panel that we've got here today. By way of introduction, to my left, we've got Rebecca Masremula, Hydrogen and Energy Chief Director for the Department of Science and Innovation, Joanne Bate, Chief Operating Officer for the IDC and also Presidential Climate Change Commissioner, Natasha Fulyun, CEO of Anglo-American Platinum, Shamini Harrington, Vice President of Climate Change at SASL and also Presidential Climate Change Commissioner, Mohamed Hussain, Managing Director for Renewables for Africa, Middle East and Asia at Engie, and also Nyimpini Mabunda, CEO of General Electric. Thank you all once again for being here today.
Thank you.
So before we start, I just wanted to set the scene for everybody in the room and also our viewers online, just around this hydrogen opportunity. And so by 2050, we believe that almost 20% of the world's energy carriers needs to be, energy needs to be carried by hydrogen. There are three key trends driving this, one being regulation and the subsidies that are going into hydrogen, two being the improving economics around the technology itself, and also what we see is the relevance to hard-to-abate sectors, particularly given what we see with the Ukraine-Russia crisis and the need for hydrogen, for example, in ammonia plants. Hydrogen demand is almost doubling compared to what we thought it was by 2030, for green hydrogen, that is. And at the same time, Africa has ample land, great wind and solar load factors, and the unique technologies like the Fischer-Tropsch technology pioneered at SASL to seed new green industries. So although green hydrogen is not a silver bullet, it can really help address the GDP gap and also the jobs gap that we have in the country. And so today we'll use South Africa as a use case for the hydrogen opportunity. And in the spirit of what BCG's Climate Center has been set up to achieve, really we wanted to showcase some of the great work that's being done on the ground by government and private sector in the hydrogen economy. So with that, I'd like to pose my first question to you, Rebecca. And unlocking the green hydrogen opportunity will require a nationally coordinated approach to make sure we've got the right skills, infrastructure, and financing at the right scale to make sure that we can capture this opportunity. Can you tell us a bit more about how government is orchestrating an enabling environment to help this competitive industry being anchored in South Africa?
Okay. No, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak today. I'd like to start with a quote that says, "Make your vision so clear that your fears become irrelevant." And I think in South Africa we've done that. We have the Hydrogen Society Roadmap. We have the hydrogen commercialization strategy coming out from DTIC. We have other policies coming out. Even presidency is taking a role on this transition. So I think government's job is to show the vision and make sure that it's going to be a fearful process, but any change is fearful. Our second step as government is to listen, right? So basically for me, collaboration means supporting the aspirations of private sector as long as they align with national interest. And we know this movement towards a green economy is going to create jobs, it's going to create reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. And as government, our role is to listen and say, what are the needs of private sector so we can make it happen? We know that private sector is responsible for 80% of the jobs. And I think this hydrogen opportunity is really going to reduce unemployment if we do it properly. And then last but not least, as government, I think our role is the issue of inclusivity. I mean, the exciting part about green hydrogen is you can produce it in Northern Cape, Eastern Cape. You have KZN thinking about producing hydrogen, but also even in terms of the usage of hydrogen in Makalakwena mine in Limpopo and KZN for sustainable aviation fuel. So I think this effort of inclusivity is going to be there, but as government, we need to ensure that the spatial disaggregation of using hydrogen as for production, for export, as well as use is happening. And then I think last but not least, I think that when it comes to enabling environment is about building trust by keeping promises. And I think that is how government will help to allay the fears of private sector by keeping promises, be they so small, so large, but just keeping those promises consistently.
Those are great points, Rebecca. And in fact, I think with all of that you've mentioned, there's quite a massive opportunity in terms of the green hydrogen demand coming globally, right? Not just from South Africa exporting to Europe and other countries, but also to local industry as well. What do you think needs to be unlocked locally for government to actually really drive, together with private sector, that opportunity with regards to sort of tangible projects on the ground?
It's funding. Things are not at parity. So green hydrogen is much more expensive than gray. You need infrastructure that's money. And I think the question is, how do you bring to bear affordable finance But also when you bring affordable finance, make sure that the process of getting that finance is not tedious. And then last but not least, I think, if any good governance is the EIAs or the administrative processes, how can we simplify it? I think, South Africa is a part of the IPHE, which is made up of different countries, I think 33 countries across the world since 2003. All countries are grappling with this issue of regulations and so forth. So everyone's learning. The question is, do we have the flexibility to learn by doing? And really, I think having that flexibility will actually help get things on the ground.
No, I fully agree. And I think one of the things to really also spur these projects on is going to be financing, yeah? And particularly given the nascency of the technology and the green premium that we see in hydrogen. And so I know the next question to you, Joanne, is around the work that the IDC is doing. And recently you announced a program with KfW where you're trying to deploy almost 200 million euro of concessional finance. Can you tell us a bit more about that program? And also, what are some of the more innovative financial instruments that you see playing out in order to anchor some of this green hydrogen opportunity that we talk about?
Great. Thanks, Kesh. And to build off what Rebecca was saying, we do need to learn by doing. Yeah. So that's very much the program that we've launched with KfW. So there was an RFI process last year together with BCG and CSIR to identify the project opportunities. There was a short list of projects identified. And what we're looking at is through these projects to understand what the financing mechanisms are that will be required. We do require a balance of funding, so blended finance is the nomenclature of the day, but we need grant finance early on to ensure that we have the money in order to do the scoping and the feasibilities so that we can move these projects forward with speed. We then need to understand where the equity on some of these early projects is going to come from, technical assistance to support in the skills development and any other capacity building mechanism that needs to occur to enable the projects and opportunities. And then really understanding how we can leverage. So an interesting mechanism is the H2 Global mechanism where the early stage offtake is being secured by Germany through that platform, and that provides quite significant upfront benefits to the early stage projects. And what we are currently modeling is trying to understand how much early investment capital will still be required and what form should that take to ensure that we can accelerate commercial scale investments. The global opportunity is moving forward at pace, and we as a country need to understand, not just as a country, I think as a region, we need to think about how we unlock that opportunity through those early stage grant and blended finance solutions. And the KfW partnership is very much collaboration, so we would be co-funding together with KfW.
No, it's a great initiative, Joanne. And I think in the spirit of finance as well, Natasha, I know quite recently Anglo Platinum has also committed, I think, $100 million to AP together with AP Ventures, with the goal of investing in companies that support the development of innovative and competitive technologies that will actually anchor a bit the demand for PGM group metals. So can you tell us a bit more about how Anglo Platinum is leveraging this investment to enable the green hydrogen economy, and also how South Africa can benefit from platforms like this?
Yeah, thank you, Kesh. I think that's such an important question, and I think as a company, it's important for me to just probably stand back and say, we are here because we're proudly South Africa. We are managing the world's best PGM resources, and they are based in South Africa. So from a minerals point of view, Rebecca has touched on a natural resource point of view, we are really richly endowed. And if we consider the just transition, we believe that we've got a critical role to play to develop this industry, not only for our own decarbonisation journey, because it's integrated in how we think about our decarbonisation journey. It is critical for the future of the PGM industry, and we all know that 80% of the world's PGMs are mined in South Africa, and there's a large portion of our population dependent on PGM mining in South Africa. But then the role that we know PGMs can play in a greener and healthier world. So we have indeed announced the AP Ventures in 2018, and at the time we have invested $1 million in that venture. Since then, through venture partners, we've got 11 official partners at the moment. We've grown that fund, and it's $4 million under management in that fund. The team's work has really been quite extraordinary in having identified 500 different projects with PGM opportunities linked to the hydrogen economy. And it's all linked into some of the factors that both Rebecca and Joanne has spoken about, is in creating the right environment, developing the technology and driving to economically and price parity hydrogen production. So 24 of these PGM containing technologies are being developed across the world. Now the question is, how are we bringing this back to South Africa? On home soil, we've got a number of different facilitation ventures going. We have our Zimele project, who is ideally suited and funded to not only help localize some of these initiatives through the development of entrepreneurs, but also helping with seed funding and the commercialization of these projects. So with, I think, a combination of partnerships and collaboration, as we've seen quite a number, we've been working closely with the IDC, for instance, we believe that this will unlock significant opportunities for South Africa. I've recently had a talk where I'm really passionate about this industry, and I firmly believe that as South Africa we can become exporters of energy. Now with the current Eskom challenges, on LinkedIn that didn't go down well, and I got several comments back to say, well, let's just first look after ourselves. Absolutely agree with that. But because in looking after ourselves, we will unlock an economy that we've lost with manufacturing in this country that has exited because of reliable, affordable energy. We can bring that back. But I think it's important, and I love the way that Rebecca has started. We need to have a big vision for what is the art of the possible. And I think with that big vision, our current Eskom challenges and power challenges will become really small in the bigger scheme of things.
That's brilliant. Thanks for sharing that, Natasha. And I fully agree. I think having the right vision and also a bit of a master plan approach to thinking through the hydrogen economy is really, almost a bit of a way to build competitive advantage at a national level.
That's
and
right.
that's something that South Africa can focus on as well. But I think speaking also about local projects and leveraging innovation to also drive this competitive advantage, I think the work that Sasol is doing as well with regards to leveraging the Fischer-Tropsch technology and almost turning a coal to liquids operation into a green hydrogen production facility is now actually an amazing story. And maybe I'd pose my next question then to you, Shamini, around how Sasol is actually innovating around the FT technology to make sure that you can realize your ambition of becoming this new green hydrogen major and almost move away from this very carbon-intensive path to something that's really green in the future.
Thanks, Kesh. Yeah, it's quite a tall task, but we're definitely up for it. So Sasol last year came out with our Future Sasol strategy. And as we all know, Sasol is the second largest emitter of greenhouse gases in the country. So very much like Anglo as well, our decarbonization is very much tied to how we think about the future and how we're going to transform ourselves. And our technology, Fischer-Tropsch technology, is something we know, we've got expertise in 70 years worth of it, is a technology that's very much needed together with green hydrogen, renewable energy, a sustainable carbon source to be able to produce the products that are very much needed in a low carbon future. Sustainable aviation fuel, very much needed to decarbonize aviation sector, a huge contributor to global emissions. And of course, we can do that. And very much as what Natasha said, we can become an exporter as a country of this very amazing product to a market that needs it globally, the EU, the US. But we really need to be able to bring those costs down, make it cost competitive, and to do that, we need to partner. We need a partnership ecosystem. So I'm so glad to be amongst these colleagues here today, because everyone in one way, shape, or form is participating in the value chain to unlock a huge potential for the country. We can, through various projects, start bringing down the cost if we get together and collaborate. We had a panel just before this, and that was the sentiment by each and every CEO. And to do this, we've started a number of catalytic projects, not by ourselves, using our ecosystem, our relationships, to be able to unlock the space. We're looking at brownfield, greenfield projects. We're looking at projects using our Secunda facilities. We've got assets in the ground already that can be transformed very quickly, I might add, compared to the global average, to be able to produce green hydrogen. So we've partnered, Joanne has spoken about the H2 Global Auction. We've partnered with Enertruck, a German company, Navitas, well now it's called Hydrogen, Linde, to be able to start producing sustainable aviation fuels on that site. We're hoping to get that done by 2025. We've also got a project in Sasolburg looking to use our existing 60 megawatt electrolyzer to produce green hydrogen for the local market, and that's by 2023. So we're really pushing and we're moving as fast as we possibly can. But we're not stopping there. We're not just going with brownfield projects. You got to also work in the market of greenfield as well, because you never know how the market's going to evolve. And so we've got a big catalytic project, a flagship project, I'd like to think of it, and that's in Bokubai, Northern Cape, where green hydrogen can be produced with those wonderful endowments, renewable energy abundant, and we're looking to export using infrastructure, building an ecosystem, and then of course bringing that into the country. That project alone can be scaled up to bring in jobs, thousands of jobs, hundreds of thousands of jobs. Just on the phase one, we're looking at about 6,000, 15,000 temporary jobs. I mean, this is massive. We are really thinking about a big ecosystem to hopefully change, but we need more partners. We need more action around this space. So very much excited to talk more about this and hear from others how we can collaborate.
No,
Thanks,
that's
I'll
great,
leave it there.
Shamini. No, that's great. And I really like the two examples that you and Natasha gave of these practical projects that are on the ground now. Yeah. It's not something that's on paper when it comes to the African hydrogen opportunity. It's actually happening as we speak. And picking up on your comment about collaboration, I think going on to Mo as part of a multinational company that's also driving innovation globally on the topic. I think the collaboration that you've had with Anglo Platinum in this space has been also a great example of what that good collaboration can look like. So can you tell us a bit more about how did you go about thinking about that collaborative strategy or partnership approach? And also how you're partnering with other players in the economy as a multinational to really help enable the South African green hydrogen opportunity.
Thanks, Kesh. I mean, I think as far back as 2015, NG recognized the value of hydrogen in the transition, both at a corporate level, but more importantly at a country level. And when we started to think about hydrogen, I mean, our expertise and background is in the renewable energy space. And we saw that in the green hydrogen value chain specifically, clearly you needed that ability to, power your electrolyzer from green energy. And when we looked across the globe, we needed to identify areas that lends itself to be able to produce this green hydrogen. And clearly we all know that it's Chile in South America, South Africa here, Morocco, Egypt in North Africa, Australia as typical examples of countries that can use the endowment that they have to produce green hydrogen. But we went further than that and said, in those geographies, how do we then enable this green hydrogen? Because we all know it's a nascent technology. You need to demonstrate that it can work. You need to demonstrate that it's commercial in order to be able to attract the funding from the likes of the IDC. So we have been present in South Africa for over 10 years now. We understand the landscape, we understand the stakeholders. So we needed to find somebody that allows us to bring some competitive advantages that we do, complementary to what needs to be done in the South African context. And in around 2018, we started to have discussions with Anglo Platinum. And the reason it started to make sense was that it helps to work with a forward-thinking company in order to leverage these type of competencies, but also recognizing that this is something that needs to be enabled today to be realized at scale in the future. And working with somebody like Anglo to be able to demonstrate a proof of concept and then to be able to scale that proof of concept to realize the full potential and the value of green hydrogen in this particular instance in the mobility scale. And South Africa is an important part for us for many of the reasons that has already been mentioned. And I think Shamini mentioned Sasol, and I think that's the other reason why it's such an important let's say, destination to be able to leverage the technology is that you have companies that have the expertise, the experience, and the know-how. And partnerships, this idea of network innovation is to bring like-minded people together to leverage this. And that is the reason why we see South Africa as a key country on this continent to enable this leverage that we all talk about.
No, that's excellent to hear, Mo. And I mean, you mentioned sort of the need to scale, yeah? And I think to scale something of this size, it will require also some local manufacturing capability and localization of competitive value chains, where we've got a right to actually be competitive. So I think with that in mind, it's great to have you next on the panel, Nimpini, as head of GE, as a global leader in component manufacturing in the energy value chain as well. At the same time, with good experience in driving localization in the past. Yeah? So it would be great if you can talk a bit about how localization can be used in the concept of driving a just transition in South Africa, and what do we need to do to get that right, especially in the sort of high-tech industry that you're in.
Thank you, Kesh. I think to start off with, I feel like I'm leading a company that is local, that is South African. Of course, many of you know GE's roots in the US, but what many people don't know is that South Africa was the first international market that GE expanded to outside of the US. And we've been in South Africa for 125 years. Wow. So I think with that kind of history, it's fair to say we are proudly South African. And I think secondly, specifically on hydrogen, I've had a theme here from both Rebecca and Johan about learn by doing. You have to experiment and perfect it. And I'm proud to say that as GE, we've been using fuel in our turbines that contain hydrogen for 30 years now. In fact, we have 8 million hours of experience with fuel that contain hydrogen. Currently, we have about 100 turbines around the world that are operating on that. And specifically, 100% pure hydrogen, we actually had 180,000 hours of that. And why I pick up on learn by doing is that it's not perfect. Of course, we know that there's still a huge way to go in terms of getting it really of right commercial scale. But there's massive improvement, and the technology is taking us there, right? So from a localization point of view, I think from a GE perspective, we'll draw from the massive experience we have in executing large infrastructure projects in the country. And I think one of the best known case studies for localization is the locomotive contract that we've done. It was about 57 billion rands with Transnet, which were actually manufactured locally in Springs. And that was really a great showcase of localization. And of course, we've done lots of work in Medupi and Kusile around that. So for me, there's a couple of lessons that I really want to share and critical factors that we need to think about in localization. The first one is the market, the viable market size. And I think here we need to learn from the auto industry. The auto industry, in terms of their incentives and what they are doing in Roslyn, the Eastern Cape, and in KZN with Toyota, is a fantastic example of what you can do when you have integrated planning. And what I want to pick up specifically on that is the fact that of all the vehicles manufactured here, less than 20% are for the domestic market. Scale is important, market size. We've had so many attempts to manufacture locally. The market was just not big enough. And when I hear Rebecca and everyone else talk about export, and of course, something that Natasha is mentioning as well around unlocking the export market, it's critical beyond what Africa Continental Free Trade Zone can offer us. But we need scale, because manufacturing is about efficiencies, it's about the numbers, and it's about sustainability. So for me, market and working through that is critical. The second part is about product mix or specialization. You can't be all things to all people. I mean, there's lots of competitors from a manufacturing point of view who are very efficient. So we need to know what is it that we can do competitively, and what is it that we've got local inputs that we can actually leverage from mineral resources, from the kind of skill that we have in the country. So we need to leverage what we already have, because at the end of the day, local manufacturing is also about cost competitiveness, right? So therefore, proximity of inputs and then getting it at the right cost is very important. We have all of this debate all the time where my counterpart sitting in India says, I can lend the same product to you in South Africa cheaper than we can manufacture it. That becomes a challenge. So we need to really, really focus and prioritize things we can do competitively and specialize. And the auto industry, again, have done that. They're not manufacturing all models. They are specializing so that you don't have much downtime and so on. The last one for me that we've learned over the years, which is critical, goes without saying, is the skill. Availability of skill. And I think here, because we're looking at the long term, we need to go back to the foundation. We need to go back to high schools. We are not, if you look at 10x demand for renewable going forward, we just don't have enough scale. And we need to have exponential growth from a skill point of view, and the base, which is the foundation at high school, has got to deliver sufficient numbers for us to convert. And I think that's where we need to look at, because we've got a longer term view. If the schools and the universities are not producing enough STEM, then you are going to have a shortage. So you need to solve it at source.
No, 100%. I think skills development is going to be one of those critical things, not just for hydrogen, but for the entire energy transition that we need to get right in the country. And actually, I think that's a good segue back to you, Rebecca, with the work that you've done with the Hydrogen Society Roadmap, and also looking at some of the skills that are needed to really enable the hydrogen economy. In your experience, do you see sort of practical examples of how that can work, how that skills development process can work between what government is doing and also what private sector is doing on their side?
During the COVID-19 pandemic, lots of youth lost jobs. So during that time, we were doing deployments to support the Department of Defense, and we were doing training of Department of Defense officials. And then we said, what about youth? Could we use this opportunity for having fuel cells on the ground for practical training? So we took a cohort of unemployed graduates from University of Technology and TVET colleges. They have background electricians, chemical engineering, and we actually had a 6-week scale-up program, and some of those students actually got jobs, and some of them to this day were running a fuel cell very successfully for the Department of Defense. So it shows that we do have the capabilities. I think there's just a lack of opportunities for it to happen, but the reason why I think it works so well is because the training course was put in place in partnership between the university and the private sector partner. That was so important. There was no academic, like, we think this may happen. It was like the private sector says, this needs to work. People will die if the ventilators are not powered by the fuel cell. So it was ground zero in a sense. So it was just so great to see the youth being inspired. This is under COVID, people, could have gotten infected, but they came to class. And then we had another instance where, the energy storage sector is growing in South Africa in partnership with a local company, F&B Energy. We actually trained a cohort of 12 unemployed TVET graduates for the energy storage sector. Again, half of them didn't make it through their 12-week training course because they were taken up by the company because they were scaling up. So we can do it. Granted, this is like bespoke programs, and the question is, how do we scale it up? But I think it's important to show that it's possible, and then say, with what's possible, let's scale it up in partnership with private sector, so they get what they need.
Agreed. Brilliant.
Yeah, those are excellent points, Rebecca. And I think the challenge is, how do you take these small use cases of us having done it and really use that to anchor massive scale up of skills development as well? Because I think particularly with vocational skills, you do need to have a critical mass of people who know how to do it, and then you use that to sort of anchor the next generation or to scale up the skills development in the country. So I think having those examples are really, really good to see. Actually, want to go back to you, Natasha, on the work that Anglo have done, particularly in the launch of the hydrogen truck at Mogalakwena. I mean, that's cutting edge technology. Obviously, there's lots of talk around EVs versus hydrogen electric vehicles, and clearly, you're pioneering in that space. How has been that sort of skills development and innovation journey for you in Anglo Platinum, having gone through one cycle of actually getting something on the ground?
I think from a skills development point of view, it was very much our own thinking and developing our understanding of the technology and an input process, I think, to understand what are the kind of skills that we need. I think interestingly enough, though, if I think about the journey of the truck, it actually started with us wanting to build a PV plant to secure renewable energy for Mogalakwena. And with a normal kind of thinking around how we do business, you need to have certain hurdle rates, and it just didn't meet the hurdle rates. When we changed our thinking, which I think is fundamental to how we're going to support this transition, if you're talking about skills, it is also our ability to change the way we think about energy and the energy system. We then stood back and said, okay, let's just make sure that it breaks even and doesn't need to hit hurdle rates. Suddenly, we now were producing more energy than what we needed. So what do we do with this energy? Because we can't store it. And obviously, with a significant interest in hydrogen, we decided, well, let's generate hydrogen. And then the next question is, so what on earth do we do with the hydrogen? And that's how the idea of generating or of developing the truck. I think there's significant technological understanding development that we've done in the process to understand how you best, from an economic point of view, how do you set up the entire system, both within the powertrain and also the utilization of the truck within the broader mining ecosystem? Because as we know, as it stands today, green hydrogen is not at parity yet. So, but thinking about the system differently was, I think, fundamental part of the success of the truck, over and above the human ingenuity that went into designing the entire powertrain and thinking about how you integrate it with the normal kind of control systems that you will have in a truck. I think it also gives us an insight of what we're going to need to really think about how energy transition is going to happen. You touch on BEVs versus ICE vehicles or BEVs versus hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicles. I think the world is waking up to the realization that if we think about point solutions and one-on-one replacements, hydrogen is not on parity with diesel or petrol yet. But is that the right way of thinking about it? Because if we think about the entire system that we need to generate all the way from how we think about renewables into final end use and all of the aspects of it, it is a whole new economic reality that we need to think through. Because point-for-point solutions is not going to give us the economic solution. And if you ask about skill, that is certainly driving a very different way of thinking about how we drive the energy transition as a whole. And I think hydrogen will play a key role in that energy transition.
No, I fully agree, Natasha. And maybe back to you, Joanne. I guess a lot of what we've heard around sort of scaling up the new business and also developing skills to drive these new businesses and anchoring local value chains will always depend on finance. And we talked about the KfW IDC program earlier. Obviously, that concessional finance needs to be deployed in a way that catalyzes investment into those industries. So what do you think is needed to really, the role that IDC is playing now is to drive those catalytic investments. What do you think is needed to unlock that going forward between what government and also private sector can do?
And I'm going to pick up on the integrated planning and the different thinking and the systemic thinking that needs to take place. There's not enough concessional funding to fund everything that needs to happen. And what we need to avoid is concessional funding going into the earliest opportunities. We need to ensure concessional funding unlocks and catalyzes, as you say. And when we think about the decarbonisation opportunity, it's more of a reindustrialization opportunity that we are looking at. And we need to think about how we plan to reindustrialize the economy as a green economy enabled by our decarbonisation. And I think if we do it in that way, we'll be able to understand from a fiscus perspective what are the concessions we can make that are going to not only protect revenues in the future but generate new revenues. So I think that our approach to funding and de-risking needs to be fundamentally different, driven by this integrated planning and systemic thinking.
Yes.
And I can't help to add, because that is fundamental to the just transition in the end of the day. Because if we only link at point solutions and we need to replace the coal mining sector in Mpumalanga, we will not be able to do the just transition properly.
Agreed.
Yeah.
No, 100%. I think it speaks also back to that point around collaboration, which is a theme that continuously comes up in all the discussions we're having. And I think maybe just to go back to you, Shamini, you know, you mentioned Sasol is driving quite a lot of activity in the hydrogen space, and I think I wanted you to put your Presidential Climate Commission hat on as well.
Okay.
Because I think when we talk about these systemic views and all the things that need to happen across the country, the PCC is a great sort of mechanism to do that, yeah? And so what would be some of those biggest unlocks that you see sitting at that level that can really drive change in this sector?
Well, there's so many, but I mean, some have been mentioned already. I mean, the financing is critical. You need to make sure that we have a grid that's balanced properly. We need to expedite the licensing process. But I'm really going to hone in on maybe the policy landscape. I think that's really critically important. We spoke about the EU and these markets that we need to tap into because affordability exists there, the premiums can be paid there, etc. But the legislation is actually not equipped to allow market access from companies like ourselves in emerging economies. And that is a bit of a challenge. I mean, we've got the 8.5 billion that's been allocated, and it's a financial support, but support extends beyond just financial. We need to think about the full landscape of how support on the trade aspects are also looked at. Give you an example, Kesh, we've got the EU delegated acts to the Renewable Energy Directive within the EU. That's part of the Fit for 55 package for them to set very ambitious targets and meet their targets, you know, the 55% reduction that the EU has. But these rules actually extend to even economies like ours. And they actually put in place very restrictive accounting rules for green hydrogen to certify it as green. They're putting in place timeframes of 2035 for products then not to use industrial streams or unavoidable carbon, as they call it. I'm getting rather technical, but the point that I want to get to is that these things have a huge impact on us being able to tap into a market that is so needed while costs are still high, as you said, Natasha. So these things are important. We can't afford green hydrogen-based products in South Africa now. But that revenue we can generate from tapping into a market elsewhere can be used to catalyze and stimulate and generate and crowd in more financing to be able to get a market like this off the ground in South Africa. So we really need to play an active role as a collective to unlock the policy landscape. And this is throughout the world. And that's where the PCC is also looking at how to think about policy and advocacy in this space, because I think taking a much more ecosystem approach is needed here. We tend to focus in little small bits, you know, green hydrogen on its own or renewable on its own. But there's even directives on the renewable energy and how you actually have to bring renewable energy in to support green hydrogen. These things don't work for South Africa. So these are huge challenges, the policy landscape critically needing a lot of support for us to unlock this, to see this to fruition and to have it as a reality.
Yeah, I think the policy landscape is a good reflection also of that systemic thinking going beyond our borders, right?
Exactly. Correct.
Because you kind of need to do that at a global level.
Yeah, and if we don't speak about these things, sorry, Kesh, I'm going to jump in a little bit. I mean, if we don't say these things, because we've got the IGPs in country at the moment, the international partners that are supporting on the 8.5, we need to talk about the full value chain to unlock the space. 8.5 billion, as we said, a drop in the ocean, but there's a lot of other support that doesn't cost much for us to be able to get this opened. Yeah. Thank you, Kesh.
Okay. No, thank you for that, Shamini. We're drawing towards the end of the panel, but I wanted to also just go back to the conversation we had earlier around the importance of growing local capabilities, local leadership skills. And I wanted to pose the last question to you, Mo and Nyimpini, as heads of major divisions within multinational companies with operations in South Africa. I think your personal journeys are also a testament to the recognition of the international community seeing talent in Africa. Yeah? And I wanted to conclude by you telling us a bit more about your journey and sort of in your sort of path, what were the critical things that really enabled the skills development or the leadership opportunities that you see yourself in today? Maybe starting with you, Mo.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the first thing to recognize is that as a country, we are able to develop and produce people that can leave the country and be successful elsewhere in the world. I mean, that's very clear, right? It's true for most people in terms of the ability of South Africans to succeed outside of South Africa. But why that is so, I mean, I may take one or two personal points, but I think it's true in general as well. I think the first thing is that the quality of education in South African universities ranks with the best, right? So the ability to demonstrate at a very, let's say, technical level that you have the same ability to compete as with anybody else in the world. But that's true for anybody, and that's true for most areas of the world. I think the two differentiating factors for South Africa is we underestimate our ability to deal with risk. And any decision you make in your environment in which you work, risk is a fundamental component of how you make those decisions. And I think as South Africans, as I said, we have this innate ability to appreciate and understand what decision-making means in a framework of what risk means in that environment as well. The second aspect I think I would like to say about South Africa is that we also underestimate our ability to work in a cross-cultural environment. And I think if you work in an international organization, you are more generally than not dealing with people across multiple cultures, across multiple countries. And to be able to navigate in that environment and appreciate what it means to communicate, to interact, to appreciate what low context, high context, how people interact with each other coming from different environments, I think is also something that, from a South African perspective, I think is really quite different to other parts of the world. I mean, for me, those are just two things I think that enable South Africans outside of South Africa to demonstrate their ability to compete in that space.
No, those are excellent
I think Mo has covered most of the points, but I do want to, I have to mention the point that what I see here is quite impressive. We do have forums at GE like Women in Technology and Diversity, but I really think we should give a round of applause for the panel here for its diversity, right? I mean, 4 highly competent, powerful women in energy, and I think this represents the future. And I think for me, this is the thing that the international markets are starting to demand and look for. It's about diversity, diversity of thinking, diversity of background, and even from a functional perspective, because the kind of solutions we need requires innovation. And innovation happens when you put people who think differently in the same room. So that's number one. The second thing that has worked for me personally is also the international experience. So having taken the opportunity to go and work in the UK, go and work in Uganda, right now that emerging market experience is priceless. So if you're looking for solutions for Africa, to have people who have the insights and the understanding of that is quite critical. And then the last point I always tell people is we are always work in progress. So always keep on learning. So one of the things that has worked for me, for example, and some of the skill I got from BCG as an alumni is digitalization. Everybody is talking about the power of AI, the power of digital, the power of technology. And coming from a consumer goods background, but I was actually able to put myself out there to learn more about technology and digital, and that is very important. So always understand what are the skills of the future, and they're always changing, and put yourself out there to learn and keep growing.
Brilliant.
Thank you for sharing that, guys. Really, really inspirational, and I think also for everyone watching online, I think it's a great story for everyone to hear. Maybe with that, I'll offer the panel one last chance to share any last closing thoughts before I wrap up, and then we'll close the discussion. Anybody, any final thoughts? No?
No, I'd just like to say, I was just, on the sidelines, I was just talking to Natasha, and I was just saying that I hope that South Africa understands they always punch above their weight.
Yeah.
And I mean, on the stage you have, 1% of the global hydrogen sitting with Sasol. You have the largest hydrogen fuel cell truck on the ground. When I go to international conferences, I smile, and, especially hydrogen ones. Such a small country, 60 million, just over 60 million people, but so powerful in what we can do. And I think on those days when you become discouraged, remember that. And I think that's all I want to say.
Maybe just a final thought from my side as well is that Yes, as South Africans, as South Africa, I think we have quite a few initiatives that are leading the world in terms of the hydrogen value chain and the hydrogen economy. But I think we cannot be complacent, because there are other parts of the world that are doing the same and are wanting to be the leader in delivering this, let's say, hydrogen economy to the rest of the world. And I think it's imperative for us as the corporate sector, imperative for us as government, to ensure that we enable the execution of this through policy, through regulations, that we do not let go of the baton. Otherwise, it's going to be a difficult catch-up as well.
100%.
My final thought is that the scale of what we need to do in the next 2 decades, it's huge. When you talk about 10x, right, in renewable energy and everything else. So one thing that we need to build, we must build, is capability and capacity to execute. We haven't proven that to be very good lately. We have to think transformatively and exponentially on capacity to execute. Grand plans and strategies are only that. When rubber hits the road, how do we execute?
100%.
I think, Kesh, one point from my side, Luca in his introduction spoke about the climate pathways work. I think it's a real opportunity for us to be able to take that forward by now looking at what the plan is. How do we do what we need to do? This is the decade of action, and we need to act now. The opportunities are now, and we can't get complacent. So exactly what was said, we need to do and put a plan together. So maybe some future work, Luca.
You want to go?
I will do it. I'll let you have the last word before Kesh. Just to, I think, echo the words, it really is a time for action and aligned action. We need to work collectively, we need to share lessons, and we need to learn and take right action. Because if we don't look at what we learn and figure out how to scale it so that we don't have to keep repeating the lessons, we're not going to succeed as a country. And it really is a time for collaborative action. We really are competing against other countries, and I really do think that this is our opportunity to lose, and we really need to make sure we win at it.
Just probably 2 last thoughts from me. Attended the International Hydrogen Council. We're on the board of the International Hydrogen Council a couple of months ago, and also through a Platinum Week again in Europe. And the one big awareness I walked away from is, other than our contribution as Africa to the carbon journey from an impact point of view, not from a contribution point of view. There's definitely a very poorly developed view and understanding of the reliance of the developed North on the developing South. And the reliance lies in the amazing capability we have in South Africa. We've got 3 things that I think gives us an opportunity to do all the things that the panel has spoken about. We've got amazing mineral resources. We have natural resources in wind and energy. And I think we've said earlier, we're one of a handful of countries who has more natural resources than what we need for our own decarbonization journey. So we're really well suited for that export. We've got some of the most amazing people in the world, and the relevance of that, Rebecca has mentioned it earlier, on the ability of South Africans to innovate, to work with risk, to be agile and flexible. We've got 74% unemployed youth out there with a need to do something that want to contribute and make a better life. Now, if we take that 3 together and we can't make a success out of it, then I think our children will definitely have something to frown upon if they look back at our journey as leaders in South Africa.
Thank you for that, for those inspirational words, I think, from everybody. I mean, I can only echo what's already been said, and I think the one thing I would point out is you've got local South African companies, multinationals, and government all sitting on stage and driving alignment on a sort of master plan to make this work, and also showing that this can be done. And I think if we can scale this sort of activity within South Africa and more broadly within Africa as well, it could really bode well for the future of the African hydrogen opportunity. So with that, I think I would like to officially close the panel. I'd like to really thank my guests once again for joining and making the time in their day to participate in the panel. It's been really an exceptional discussion. Thank you so much for your contributions. And I think with that as well, we'll close the event. I'd like to thank everybody for attending and also to our viewers online. We hope you enjoyed the session today, and we look forward to the journey ahead in really making not just the hydrogen opportunity reality, but a just transition to net zero reality. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.